My friend Charlie couldn't find a Lazy Susan the correct size for his dining table, so foolishly I offered to make him one. I decided to use a Kumiko pattern just because I've done Kumiko before, and I thought making one asanoha pattern would be quite easy. It turns out it's really difficult because, one, this has to be very strong, and Kumiko is generally decorative. And secondly, I wanted to fill in all these triangles here with solid wood so that we could place food, of course, on top of it, and that's not normally the case with Kumiko. And to make that happen, I had to cut dados around all of these edges, which made this joint in the center super complicated to make. So if you'd like to see exactly how I made this, all the joinery that went into it and the different stages, please watch the rest of the video. It's always a really exciting part of any build when the wood arrives. The wood arrived today. I'm super excited to get it out and take a look, see what kind of grain I've got, see what kind of knocks there are, see whether it's sort of good quality or not. That's definitely the white oak, and that's really nice quality. This is just rough sawn. This is not machined, but actually that looks really nice. And then this one should be the rest of it. I ordered some paduk and some black walnut. So let's see what's in this one. Okay, yep. So there's the black walnut. A bit of a nasty knot there, but it's very straight, it's very flat, and it's got quite nice grain, quite nice colour. The colours match really nicely between the planks. So this is my paduk. I'm going to resaw this one into 3 or 4, make it thinner. Get to that bit later. I didn't do a lot of planning for this project. Usually I draw everything out in detail, but in this case I just did this rough sketch of a table with some plates on it and a Lazy Susan in the middle, just to give me some idea of like what I want it to look like. I also took some dimensions off this. Got some dimensions here, which I've written in millimeters, because I think they're just easier to when you want to accuracy. And I also, did a few rough sketches over here and did a bit of sizing on the wood, so that I know like what kind of wood I need to buy. One of the problems I'm going to have with this project is that I don't actually have a flat surface in my workshop. You can see by looking at this piece of wood here that's on my workbench, you can see how much of a gap there is in the middle because the workbench sags in the center. So I think in order to assemble this, I think I am going to need a flat surface. So I think probably the first part of this project is going to be to build a torsion box that I can use to actually build the Lazy Susan onto. Here I am at my local DIY store looking for some wood for this project. I think this one looks pretty good. This is about 3.5 inches by 3/4 inch. It's only $4 a piece. It's 8 foot long. I think this will be perfect. For the sheet material, it doesn't need to be that thick. These ones are 3/4 inch. It has to have a reasonably good surface though, so I'm looking for something that's reasonably well finished. It doesn't have to be flat, so the beams will ensure the flatness. This one here is a possibility. This is a 5/8 of an inch, and that one's $56 a sheet, and I would need 2 sheets of that. So that's the wood loaded into the car and heading home. I got home with the wood for the torsion box. You can see it's full of staples and things. So the first thing is going to be to clean up the wood. It's a bit of a mess. These pieces are not too bad though in terms of being straight, but I will of course put them through the jointer and the planer to make sure that they're perfectly flat and perfectly parallel sided. A little bit tight in places. That's all right. Okay, there's my flat surface done. Seems to be pretty flat, and it should stay flat. The first thing to do is take this 8/4 sawn white oak and cut it like this into 1 inch wide strips. So start by jointing this top edge and then putting the top edge against the fence on the table saw, and then sawing 1 inch, and then routing, then jointing again, and then sawing, and then jointing, and then sawing all the way down until I create I'll probably get at least 4. Hopefully I can get 5. To do these cuts along the grain on my white oak, I'm going to take out the usual blade, which I have in the standard general purpose blade, and I'm going to switch it for this narrow kerf blade that's designed for rip sawing. Because it's 2 inches thick, it's hardwood, it's going to be a bit tough on the saw. This blade should do it. So I set up my saw with 1 1/8 inches between the fence and the inside of the blade. So I'll have, I want to end up with 1 inch, so I'll cut it to 1 1/8, and I'll have 1/8 of an inch to cut off with the plane, just to make sure I can get it nice and smooth. Sometimes when you cut this wood, it will bend or twist or like pop when you cut it, because there's tension inside the wood. This oak is actually very nice. It's quarter sawn, so it's got a very straight grain. This one's actually a bit wavy. Some of the other ones are more straight. We'll see what happens when we cut it. From one piece of white oak, I got 4 strips of like 1 inch thick, plus this little bit of offcut, and one of them is quite bent. Like this one is quite bent. That's because I didn't cut it in this bent. I cut it in a straight line, but there was just tension inside the wood. So I selected the 3 best pieces, which are these 3. I'm now going to joint them on 2 sides, and then plane them on the opposite 2 sides to make them 4 square. These 3 pieces are going to cross over in the center to make the spokes of the lazy Susan. It's really important as you joint your wood that you mark it so you know which side is flat and which side needs to be plane still. I usually use this symbol here, which is meant to look like an F. F for face. The stick of the F points towards the edge that's square. So the next thing is to cut this actually square by putting the face against the fence on the jointer, and then using the blades to cut this side so that this makes a perfect 90-degree corner. That'll be the next step. This is the plane that I used to do the planing. I put the F side down first and planed them on the opposite side to get them perfectly parallel, square, flat, and then flipped them over and did like this way around so that the stick of the F was facing the floor, and then planed the opposite side so that these 3 pieces of wood are now perfectly identical. So to join these 3 pieces of wood in the center of the Lazy Susan here, I'm intending to join them exactly the same way you make Kumiko. And I have some Kumiko strips here from another project, which shows how they need to be cut in order to join together. So I can cut these 3 pieces of wood like that and make like a giant sized Kumiko pattern, which is the intention, except there's a slight difference in the sense that I want to make this a little narrower, so it's a little bit finer in detail, and also create a small shelf here for the flat pieces of wood to sit on and to make these narrower. So I need to cut some rebates or rabbets, depending which side of the Atlantic you're from, into the sides of these pieces of wood, and that affects how they join together in the center. So I think I don't want to get this wrong because I don't have any more wood. I don't have just enough wood. So I think what I'm going to do is cut a little piece off the end of this and try making that center joint, and then see how it turns out.
If you're going to make a fairly complex joint and you've never made it before, I would highly recommend making this little prototype, because if you mess up on the real wood, on the big pieces of wood, maybe you don't have enough wood to finish your project. Just cutting off a little bit that's going to be scrap anyway, and making a test of the joint will help you enormously to see exactly the complicated shapes you need to cut, and you can see how the joint goes together. And you can also learn a few things by building it. One thing I learned in particular with building this mock-up joint is that it's really difficult to lay out the joint after you've already cut these rabbets or these rebates. So I think I need to make the whole joint first, all the pieces, and then this will be the last thing to do. I also discovered that I have this, which is very precise as an angle measuring thing, and you can lock it off at a certain angle. And I use that to do these 60 degrees. But it's really fiddly to hold this against the wood and to hold this here and to try to keep this at the correct angle and then mark a line. It's really tough to do that, and it's really hard to get it accurate. So what I did instead is I did a little bit of metalworking, and I created this, and it's actually properly equilateral. So if I get a measure and let's just measure it. Here, that was 50.9 millimeters, and that side is 51.0, which is within 1/10 of a millimeter, and that's also 50.98, so 51 as well. So these three sides within, like 1/20th of a millimeter or so. This triangle is the same length on all three sides, and that means that these angles must be exactly 60 degrees. What I'm planning to do is to attach this to a piece of wood like this, so that I can use it like this to mark the 60-degree angles. So I finally reached the point of doing some layout. These are the three mock-ups that I did. These are my three real pieces of white oak, beautiful wood. This is the special little marking thing that I made, which appears to be accurate. I tested that. I got a marking gauge, a marking knife, a pencil, and a square. So let's start doing some layout. So I'm going to start, I measured the length of these pieces, I cut it in, divided it by 2. Now that's the center point. I'm going to mark the center just with a pencil line. So we use pencil lines where we're not going to do any cuts. They're just there for, to mark a reference line. And then we do knife lines where we're going to actually cut with a chisel, because the chisel needs to click into the cut by the knife. So I'm going to start by doing that, so I know they're all marked in the same spot, and I'm going to carry these lines around the whole wood. So I marked all three pieces of wood all the way around with a pencil line, and it's a really good indication that the wood is really squared properly, that as I went around like this with the square, drawing lines, the final line came to exactly the same point at the end of the initial line. So that's a really good sign that our wood has been properly squared. So looking good so far. Once I've finished cutting the rebates here, I'm going to be left with a piece down the center, which is some width. I'm going to need to know what that width is to do the layout. I think I might make it 1/2 inch. I think if I look at my setup blocks, I think the 1/2 inch one is pretty similar to what I did last time. It's pretty close. So I think I'll use that for doing my markup. Yeah, this little marking tool that I made is so much better than using the one I was doing before. So I need to make sure that the tip of this is bang in the center of the wood. So the best way to get a center is to guess where the center is. I'm going to guess it's about there, and just make an impression, and then turn this around. Make another impression, and the true center is in between them. Actually, I guessed pretty good. Like so. Just tip this one over. Just get a square like this. We should be able to feel. Okay, I can feel the edge of the line there. Do it by feel rather than by looking. It's much more precise. Okay, and then goes all the way to the bottom. This is where it's so valuable to do the mock-up, because having this piece available really helps in trying to figure out exactly where I need to do the cuts to get this joint to work. Strongly recommend doing the mock-up, especially if you're doing a complicated joint and you're doing it for the very first time. So we ended up with quite a lot of knife lines here for the various cuts. I'm just going to make sure I don't make a mistake and do things stupid by outlining the shape of the joint, like here, with my pencil. So the joint is actually that shape. Okay, as per this one. Again, this mock-up is really, really valuable. So it's there, it goes there, it goes there, and it goes there. That's the actual shape that I need to cut out. So now all my layout is done, and I'm just ready to start doing some cutting out. And as usual, we start by making a saw cut, close to the line but not right on it, and then use the chisel to go right up to the line. It's just the same technique every time. Cut with the saw roughly to the line, and then chisel down with as much accuracy as you can manage. So you can see I've sawn it to about 1/16 of an inch or 1.5 millimeters away from the line. And that's about right, because the sawing is not super accurate. You don't have to be too accurate with it. You have to be very accurate with the chiseling. But the chisel is going to drop into the cuts that were made by the marking knife. So that's how the chiseling will be super accurate. Yeah, it looks pretty good. It's a little bit loose actually, but it's lined up nicely, and if I slide all the way to the bottom, it fits in still all the way down, and also in this direction. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I think I'll cut the bottom piece next, which needs to look like this. So again, starting by doing some saw cuts here, and then chiseling out the rest down to a depth of 2/3, leaving this 1/3 at the bottom here. After one more pass with the rudder plane, you can see I'm now 5 thousandths under. Well, maybe just exactly right. So I finished the bottom piece, and I finished this middle piece. This is more or less complete. And these two pieces do fit together like this. And once they're together, there's a little gap here that's, I can, with difficulty, just about get that 1/2 inch block in. And now for the moment of truth, where we see if the top piece will fit.
Now that I have the 6 spokes coming out from the center, the next thing is to build a hexagon around the outside. So I've cut these pieces of wood here. I've cut them at 30 degrees at the end and cut them to the correct length. And I've made these mortise holes here. So now I just need to cut tenons at 30 degrees into the ends of these pieces. So we need to get this piece of wood to go into this mortise hole here. But we never do things by measuring with a ruler. That's hopelessly inaccurate. What you need to do is get a marking gauge, measure this distance here, like that, lock it off, and then take that over to this piece of wood and scribe a line here. That's where we need to cut this in order for it to fit perfectly into that slot there. So I've now connected up all the edge pieces, and the joints look pretty good. So they're reasonably tight all the way around, like this. Right. So, but what I discovered is as you go around like this, I didn't join up the last one, the very last joint. I didn't cut it on purpose, because I wanted it to just fill up the remaining space. So at the very end here, there is no tenon cut here, and what I can see is that it actually the overlap is too much. So I've determined that at the close of this circle, like to close the hexagon, my last piece is about 10 millimeters too long. And so that implies I need to remove 2 millimeters from each of these struts here. Before doing that though, I just wanted to make sure where I'm at with the equilateral business. So what I did was I put a ruler in there and here, and I put a little piece of tape at the length of that piece there. And then if I put it here and compare, you can see that the tape here is perfectly lined up. So that length and that length are exactly the same. If I put it across here and look at it, I can see here there's also, this piece is about 2 millimeters longer. So if I remove 2 millimeters from the length of these pieces, not only will that make the hexagon close up properly at the end, but it will also make these perfectly equilateral, which is obviously what we want. So this is the ruler that I used to check for equilateral, and the little tape marks are still there. So this tells us like how long this needs to be cut to. And you can see how much extra there is. So I've been all the way around and I've recut all the joinery. So all these pieces are now 2 millimeters shorter. And I've checked with the ruler to make sure these triangles are now all properly equilateral. And now when I get to this last piece, which I hadn't cut yet, if I force this as hard as it will go here and put it on the line, then you can see that now it comes exactly to the center of this piece. So that's actually exactly where it needs to be. This can be cut identically to the other pieces. It doesn't need to be made slightly longer or shorter to compensate. Everything actually fits 100% perfectly. So the moment of truth, I've cut the final end here. So this piece should complete the hexagon. So might need to stretch it a bit. Okay, there, it's in. It's tight. All the joints are tight. Looks perfect. The joinery is complete at this point, so I thought I'd take a moment just to show you what the joinery actually looks like. The tips of these spokes are especially delicate and were quite difficult to do. I think this is the first time I've ever made a 30-degree mortise and tenon joint. So this frame is pretty much complete now, this hexagon. So I decided to go ahead and glue it in the center. I used a couple of chunks of wood wrapped in polythene. So I cut up the black walnut into the correct length pieces, and I've cut 30-degree angles on the ends. And then on one end, I've done a tongue. Of course, on the other end there'll be a groove, but I haven't cut the grooves yet. I have cut the groove on this one because this one has already been installed on the edge of the Lazy Susan, and we're just waiting for the glue to dry on this one. I'm at the halfway point with the gluing on of the edges now. Of course, they'll have to be cut to a circle later. Notice how I put the edges on before filling in the middle, because I needed to be able to clamp the edges on like this. Actually starting to look a little bit like the drawing, although, you know, still got a way to go. Getting these boards to fit seamlessly along the edges requires a very well set up plane that takes these very, very fine shavings. To cut the edge of the Lazy Susan so it's perfectly round, I decided to use the fact that the Lazy Susan can rotate. And I made this custom router table where basically I mounted my router underneath a piece of plywood, which is at the exact same height as the Lazy Susan. And then I can place the Lazy Susan on here and then rotate the Lazy Susan in front of this router blade to cut the edge to a perfect round shape. So I placed the Lazy Susan down on the custom router table so you can see how it works. You can see it floats just above that surface. I also added a little bit of very primitive dust collection here because I think it's going to make quite a bit of dust. And yeah, ready to go. It's time to start doing the asanoha pattern in the middle of my giant Kumiko. And so I need to measure the length of the sides of this equilateral triangle, which is 437 millimeters. And this way, also 437 millimeters. So take 437 millimeters, divide by the square root of 3, and that will tell us the distance from here to the center of this equilateral triangle. I'm using this stock block on my miter saw to guarantee that I'm going to cut each piece to exactly the same length. I'm using the block that I normally use for my Kumiko to do the little strips for the Asanoja pattern, but in this case, because it's so large, it doesn't fit in the slot, so I put it by the side of the block and cramped it in my vise. This is an absolutely crazy big Asanoja pattern. I can't believe that I'm making this. And because I have this little shelf running around here to take the inlay, I can't just cut my Kumiko pieces in the regular style. I have to actually create a little shelf like this so that they will, you know, fit like this into the design. I've got my first quadrant of the pattern in place, and it seems to be pretty tight. It's pretty tight there. It's pretty tight on that corner. The three pieces come together in the middle perfectly, and the center's looking a bit messy, but once I've sanded it, it's going to look fine. Cutting dozens of these identical Asanoja pieces does actually feel a lot like making a Kumiko, but of course on a much bigger scale. So I finished making all the asanoha pattern pieces and fitting them into the hexagon frame, and yeah, it's looking okay. It looks like asanoha. Shaping these rectangles to fit precisely into the pattern is really testing my planing skills and getting me back up to practice with it. This plane's working really well though. I think I've got this one just about right. Let's see how well it fits. Oh, yeah. That's pretty tight. Yeah, looking good. This is a pretty big moment in this build. I've finished all 18 of these triangles. They've taken about 45 minutes each. So it's been about 12 hours of work to cut these, not including machining the wood down to the right thickness. And this is the very last triangle. Might need a little bit of help there with the mallet. Okay, well, it might need a small adjustment, but basically that's all the triangles made. So what's left to do on this project now is the sanding and the finishing. I'm going to start with a 220 grit and then move on to a 400 and an 800 grit for this. I did think about maybe starting with 80 just to get it smooth and flat, but it's actually reasonably smooth already. I don't think I need to take off too much material to make it really flat. I've got my sander hooked up to my dust collector, so I don't need to wear a respirator. I think this sanding is probably going to take me about 2 hours, so see you in 2 hours time. The sanding is finished. I actually set a timer on my phone. I did 20 minutes of the coarse grit and then 10 minutes of each of the progressively finer grits. And yeah, I think, I don't know if you can see on the video, but it's very, very flat and very smooth. And now I just need to add some wax. So this is how it's looking after one coat of Osmo. It's already looking pretty shiny. I haven't even polished it up yet. I've just literally applied it, and now I'm waiting for it to dry so I can polish it. Okay, so this is my friend Charlie. Charlie, what do you think of the lazy Susan that I made for you?
Beautiful. Thank you, Martin. Really, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah.
So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching me make this lazy Susan. I'm really pleased with it. I think it's a beautiful piece of furniture. I think my friend Charlie is going to absolutely love it. I'm going to leave you with some still photos to watch as we wrap up this video for today. And see you next time.